not only is it for money saving, but the taste is very different.
Yes, when you pull something out and eat it almost immediately,
Exactly.
it has a much stronger, nicer taste comparatively to it's sitting somewhere or partially wilting.
And we know for a fact that it hasn't been sprayed with anything, there's no fertilizers, and all of these things do affect the taste, definitely.
Hey, Nico here from Green Space Zambia, and today we're with Jamie Townsend, owner and operator and main chef at the Rusty Bucket here in the Lalai area. And we've come to kind of tour his vegetable garden where he grows as much of the vegetable for the restaurant effectively. Do you want to kind of just give us a bit of an overview, what you are growing and maybe the reasons for it?
Okay, so I know this is quite a big space, but what we do is we try and grow as much of the food we use at the restaurant ourselves. Essentially, the Rusty Bucket is a farm-to-plate restaurant. So we grow the chickens, as many as we can, we grow as many of the vegetables as we can, and we've also just started doing rabbits. Rabbits are very good in creating manure that doesn't need to be composted before used, whereas the chickens and their bedding creates really nice mulch for all the vegetables. We don't use any sprays in this garden, and we also don't grow anything out of season because we just can't do it. So once it's in season, we plant as much as we can, and we just keep changing the beds over and over as much as possible, but only using organic waste. We don't use any fertilizers or anything like that either.
Just the organic fertilizers you're getting from the livestock side of it coming in. Would you compost the chicken manure and the bedding before you put it down as a mulch?
We try to keep it for as long as possible, yeah.
Yeah, because of the high nitrogen content might burn plants, especially if they're getting established at that point in time. So now we are transitioning from the kind of cold dry season into the hot drier season.
Well, we've started putting in the pumpkin leaves already. And then once the sweet potato leaves, the calembla starts actually shooting nicely, then we'll put that in as well. We also like to use things like kanunka, which is blackjack, and a lot of bondwe. So we collect all the wild seeds we can and spread them in the garden, and then let them grow naturally.
Oh, nice, interesting. Because there's not many places that I would imagine, unless you're going to a more traditional restaurant, that will be using blackjack or even bondwe.
Well, we also feed ourselves. All of the staff eats in shima on a daily basis, so we need enough vegetables for that. And then also the home staff as well also get fresh vegetables every day.
Are there things that you generally need on a regular basis that you don't grow? Because I don't see any tomatoes in here, and tomatoes generally tends to be a staple within the Zambian garden.
True, but I find tomatoes take up too much space.
Yeah.
So we try and maximize the amount of money saved per square meter of garden. Yeah. If that makes any sense.
Yeah, no, fair enough. And tomatoes you might use one, whereas leafy vegetables you're using a bunch.
Exactly. And this time of year at 100 quattro a box, it makes more sense just to buy it. Yeah. Whereas leafy vegetables, this will definitely save me more than 100 quattro.
And then what about things for onions? I see you've got your larger green onions here, but
we have a few onions over there, but again, these are the spring onions we use a lot of. Yeah. Actual onions, again, if we filled the whole garden with onions, we might not even spend a year with those onions. So it's not cost effective. Yeah. If we had a bigger space, we'd grow more onions, but it just seems easier to buy tomatoes and onions and then concentrate on the fresher sort of daily stuff. Yeah.
So even though you're doing organic here, you cannot guarantee
of course not.
Production of organic for your tomatoes and onions, which is very difficult in that sense. Yeah.
And also with tomatoes, I believe they need a lot of sprays even this time of year, and we just don't spray anything in this garden.
Yeah, no, tomatoes are a buffet for a range of things effectively. Now I've noticed you've also got some trees planted within the vegetable garden space. We got macadamia, and behind us we've got winter thorn or fadeherbia.
Well, the winter thorn we actually planted for their organic purposes. So I believe that they actually fix a lot of nitrogen into the soil. Yeah. And then also things like lettuce and stuff don't do too well under full sun in this garden. So with the mottled shade in the winter time, it does help the lettuce and stuff to grow quite nicely. Yeah. I mean, as you can see, the chard behind you is growing very happily in the shade.
Yes.
Just the bananas, but
Well, this is the time of year, though, that especially established clumps are going to be more difficult to keep going into the hotter dry season, because having been accustomed to cooler dry weather, going hot dry weather, they'll die off.
And the trees hopefully should assist that.
They should at least kind of ease that transition.
Yeah.
Otherwise, you'd have to essentially just reestablish a new crop of the same thing.
Yeah.
And have that already accustomed to the weather.
And then things like the asparagus in the corner, they just stay there year round, and they get harvested when they actually start shooting again.
Yeah, so you don't harvest year round on those?
No.
Because I have heard that some people say that they do harvest year round, but I can't imagine, what the cultivation that they're doing is to do that. Because our asparagus, I as well just leave them for a dry period in the cold dry season, and then as September rolls around and they start to shoot again, we'll start to
And then with this particular type of spring onion, it actually goes back into a bulb at the end of the year, which we collect up and store, and then when the time is right, we put them back out again and they clump again.
Oh, really? Oh, okay. So you're essentially dealing it like a tender perennial crop, effectively. You pull it out of the garden, store it somewhere cool and dry, and then bring it back. Oh, interesting.
These ones we use a lot of, especially in the Chinese food, because we make our own egg noodles for the Chinese, using the village chicken eggs. Cake flour, obviously, we have to buy in. No, for the Chinese food and stuff, a lot of the vegetables, we've got carrots down the other side, which we grow in season. Cabbages, again, take up too much space for too long, so we end up just buying cabbages.
Nice.
And then behind us, that concrete thing there is where all the food waste from work goes, and that gets composted and then eventually comes back into the garden.
But your food waste from work, from the kitchen side, or not from people that haven't finished their foods and stuff like that?
If that ends up in the food waste container, then that comes and gets composted as well.
Even bones and things like
Everything.
that? Oh, okay, wow.
It's a very high heat composting thing.
Yeah, you'd have to have
and it does take a very long time for it to actually turn black. Only when it's completely composted do we actually bring it into the garden.
I've noticed that you don't have anything to mulch the soil at the moment. Is that something that will come now that we're going into the hot season?
Yes, very much so.
Okay, yeah. And reduce your water demand in the vegetable garden on a daily basis, effectively.
Well, especially with no electricity to pump the water.
Yeah.
That is a necessity.
Yes, definitely.
And lack of water this year.
Well, and I think, going forward, these things are going to become much more
needed.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Consistency of electricity, that access to water is becoming more difficult as more people build and pump more out of the groundwater. So we need to then make sure what we can put, we keep for longer.
Exactly.
And then, I've noticed that you've also got macadamias in here. So
I couldn't resist because I love them.
Macadamias are a lovely nut. I
don't know how much shade they're going to create, whether or not they're going to be a problem, but...
Well, they tend to be a little bit more columnar, or at least you can keep them that way if you want. You don't have to let them spread out ways.
I didn't know that. So they, funny enough, are seeding already. I don't know if I have to pull those off, but we'll have to find out about that.
Probably be best just to trim that off and let it continue to grow vegetatively for the first few years. Some of them have come on very nicely, I see, and doing very, very well.
Well, out of 20, I lost quite a few. But maybe I just planted them at the wrong time. But also, they're guaranteed to get watered here, whereas the rest of the garden, they're not.
Yes.
We don't water the grass. We don't try and keep everything alive just for the sake of good looking. We obviously water the citrus, the lemons and stuff like that, but generally the grass is just abandoned until the rain comes.
Well, and I think it's good to know what are especially when you're dealing with fruits, what are the fruits that you can just leave to their own devices versus what are those that do need water. And the citrus definitely need water throughout the year. Whereas like the mangoes that I planted a few years ago, we were watering, but this year it's like, no, stop.
No, exactly.
They'll sort themselves out.
The natural fruits are just abandoned, same as the bananas, as you can see.
Well, your bananas are going to benefit from the water that's here as well, effectively. These are ladyfinger.
Yeah.
And are you using any of your fruits at the restaurant then as well?
No, we don't grow that much. We do use the mangoes when they're green to make a mango jam.
Oh, okay.
But other than that, no, not very much.
Is it just volumes at that stage that you'd need a lot?
Yes.
No, okay. Fair enough.
And then the bananas don't produce that much, but they also disappear in the house as quickly as they grow. So
as long as bananas are irrigated year round, you know, they'll continue to produce, but it's never a consistent thing. You're not going from one bunch to the next.
Yeah, exactly.
After it finishes, harvesting the next one kind of scenario. It does have a bit of a
bananas have actually moved from about 10 meters that way. From where we first planted them, they've moved towards the garden, so we're actually in the process of
chopping them,
getting rid of them and getting them back to where they belong, because they've taken up a lot of the vegetable garden. Okay, so this is where we actually do the more...
This is your hot compost, effectively.
Yes.
Because if you are putting animal products in here, you definitely want it to get as hot as possible.
And we also don't want any animals or dogs or anything getting in there to pull it out. I mean, it can be quite toxic.
Securing this as much as possible.
Yeah.
Animals would be one of the biggest problems when you're then dealing with essentially animal scraps, effectively. Yes. But I see, you've got the eggs, you've got feathers, and all these kinds of things will attract animals, no matter how you look at it. Do you find, because you've got this protected against your dogs, but what about rats?
Rats,
they're always around. I think that's one of the things, isn't it? But they're okay. They're not giving you a huge problem from it.
No, not at the moment. But we do also have cats, which tends to keep them at bay. Yeah.
So you were saying that you keep this here for quite a while. What kind of?
I think we only harvest maybe every 6 months.
Oh, okay.
Turning is probably done maybe every 2 months, and then again when we do harvest, we only harvest what's on the bottom, and then leave the rest
in
the top.
In the turning of that harvesting, that gets turned again, and it can hopefully break down.
But when it does come out, it's very strong black compost.
And then, but you're then kind of working that into the soil, or are you using that as a? Okay, so it is actually going right into the soil.
No, we don't use it as a top dressing. It goes into the soil before everything is planted, and it still has a chance to break down even further.
Yeah, so this would be in bed preparation. You're mixing it into the bed that's going to be planted, not ones that are already planted with other things. Okay.
And then of course all of the leaf litter and stuff you see on the outside, that just breaks down naturally, especially when the rain comes, and then that'll also be harvested probably at the end of the rains.
Are you taking any dry leaves then and working it into this pile at the same time as it being turned?
There is some that's being thrown in, but not a huge amount, because it would just take up the whole compost.
Yes, well,
square.
With the size of the pile you have behind, it would, wouldn't it? Actively. Oh, very nice.
But these have not been around for very long.
Yeah, no, within 5, I would say.
Yeah.
They don't, they don't take long once they hit that stride, and they'll shoot up very, very quickly. But
plus they are watered a lot.
What are your main aims of it then? Just
harvesting.
Shade?
No, harvesting for wood.
The timbers. Okay.
But also shade until then. I really don't get on with the sun. I don't like the heat. Which is why the house is now surrounded by tuna and poison pod albizia, and it's made a difference already. All of the concretization and all of the deforestation around Lusaka is obviously increasing the heat, and it's not helping the issue we have in this drought anyway. If we can reduce the temperature with some shade, it'll obviously help the groundwater to stay a bit longer, help the water to sit on the ground and soak in a bit longer, and generally the roots and stuff also help with that. I mean, anywhere around this area where there's been an underground spring, once the trees have been removed, the spring has stopped. And it's as simple as that.